Welcome back to Daf Yomi Be'iyah. In this video we're going to be discussing the halacha first of all, that the pasuk says, Lo sachsum shor b'disho. You're not allowed to muzzle your animal as it's threshing. You have to allow it to eat from the produce. And there is a similar halacha by a human worker. Torah says that a human worker who's, let's say, harvesting, has permission to eat from the produce as he is working. As the pasuk says, Kisavo b'kerem re'echa, ve'achalta anavim kinafshecha sav'echa. If, let's say, he's working in his friend's vineyard, he's allowed to eat some of those grapes as he is working. Now, there's a Tosfos on Pei Zayin Amud Beis, which is source number 6 on the sheet, that discusses the drasha that the Gemara says there, that the pasuk says the word re'echa. When you're in your friend's vineyard, then the worker is allowed to eat. So the Gemara darshans, this excludes if he's working in the field of the Beis HaMikdash, then he's not allowed to eat. So Tosfos asks, why do you need a drasha for that? For we already know that this is the halacha by shor. The Gemara in Me'ilah darshans this from the word disho, it's source number 3. So if we know that a shor can't be allowed to eat by hegdish, well then, since on Pei Tesem Aleph, source number 5, the Gemara makes a hekesh between shor and poel. You learn the halachas of one to the other. So just apply, we know by shor that you can't let it eat hegdish, so apply the same thing to poel, and then you're finished. Why do we need a new teaching, this word re'echa, to state this halacha by the human worker? That's Tosfos' question. So Reb Chaim, in his Chidushim in the Rambam, comes to answer this question. And I gave you the whole Reb Chaim. It's source number 7 and 8 on the sheet, and it begins on source 7, Perek Ches Halacha Aleph in Hilchos Me'ilah. And we're going to talk about 4 steps that Reb Chaim says, and hopefully we will understand what Reb Chaim is trying to do, and we'll go from there. So, the first step, and this is the fundamental portion of Reb Chaim, is that he says that you have to understand there are shnei dinim here. That's classic brisk language. There are 2 different halachas over here. The halacha of lo sachsum shor b'disho is one halacha, and the halacha that a human worker is allowed to eat produce as he is working is a totally different halacha. It's in the other end of the room. How are they different? He says, Lo sachsum shor b'disho is an iser. It's a prohibition, it's a sin for somebody to muzzle an animal as it's threshing. Just like it's a sin to eat pork. It's an avera, you can't do it. That's what Lo sachsum shor b'disho, and that's it, that's all it is. On the other end, you have this halacha of a poel. What is that halacha? That halacha is a schus mamon. It's a monetary right. Somebody who's working, part of workers' rights, as I'm working on the field, Torah gives the poel a right to eat from the produce that he's working on. And that's step 1 of Reb Chaim. There's 2 different halachos here. Step 2 is, let's prove this. How do we know this is true? So Reb Chaim says, I know this is true because we find that on the one hand, the halacha that you have to let a human worker eat as he's working applies even by non-Jews. But the halacha lo sachsum shor b'disho, that you can't muzzle an animal while it's threshing, does not apply by non-Jews. Why not? The answer is we have to say this distinction, that since poel by human worker, it's a monetary law, so of course it applies even to non-Jews. Non-Jews have to keep basic monetary laws. Whereas lo sachsum shor b'disho, which is a sin, it's like not kosher, that doesn't apply by non-Jews. So we see this distinction is true. That's step 2. Step 3, as Reb Chaim points out, how do we understand this whole discussion? That we have a special pasuk that comes to teach us that a human worker is not allowed to eat from hegdish, that an animal is not allowed to eat from hegdish. How do we understand this? Why would we even think that a human worker could eat from hegdish produce? He says, for example, let's say you have someone who's a nazir. He's a worker, he's a nazir, accepted to be a nazir, which means, of course, that he can't eat grape products. Do you need a special pasuk to teach us that he's not allowed to eat the grapes as he's working the vineyard? No, you don't. There is no such pasuk. Do you need a special pasuk to teach us that if the worker is working with Meiser Sheni, that he is not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni if it's outside of Yerushalayim? No, there's no such pasuk. So what does this mean that without the pasuk I would have thought that the worker could take hegdish produce? What does that mean? So Chaim explains, based on the distinction he made, it's understandable. The argument would have been that since this worker has a monetary right to eat the produce as he's working in this field, therefore one could have argued that there is no prohibition of me'ilah in that case. Because what does me'ilah mean? Me'ilah means you can't steal from the Beis Hamikdash. But perhaps you could argue this worker was granted a monetary right by the Torah to eat from the produce as he's working. In that case, he has like permission from the Beis Hamikdash, so it's not me'ilah. There's no isser here. That's why we need a pasuk to teach us that no, there is an isser. He can't eat from Hegdish produce as he is working. So now we understand the answer to Tosafos' question. Reb Chaim says, the fact that the Torah says by shor that a shor can't be unmuzzled by Hegdish produce, that doesn't tell us anything about a human worker. By a human worker, there's a separate discussion of, well, since it's a monetary thing, perhaps therefore Beis Hamikdash gives him permission, and therefore there is no isser. So that's why you need a separate teaching of the word re'acha to teach us that no, the halach in fact is that by Hegdish produce the worker is not allowed to eat any of the produce. Now we are not going to be completely agreeing with Reb Chaim. Now of course I acknowledge if Reb Chaim were here, then I would very quickly lose this debate. But meanwhile, a person has what's in front of him, and my research has led me to believe that this is not true. And specifically, Reb Chaim is first of all suggesting that when we talk about this right of the poel, a human worker could eat the produce, that is purely a monetary right, Reb Chaim says. However, if you look in the Tur, and it's on your sheet, source number 9, Siman Shin Lamed Zayin, the Tur discusses, what if somebody violated this halacha? What if the employer said to his employee, you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat anything. He forces him, he basically muzzles him. What's the halacha? Says the Tur, he's pater, he's exempt. The Tur then makes a point of saying, what do I mean he's exempt? I mean he's exempt from lashes. However, there's still a prohibition. And the Bach explains that the Tur means, he says, which prohibition is he referring to? He's referring to that if a human employer forces his human employee not to eat, that is a prohibition of lo sachsim shor b'disho. It's a prohibition of lo sachsim shor b'disho. For the Gemara indeed tries to make a kal v'chomer. If there's a prohibition that you can't muzzle an animal, certainly you can't muzzle a human being. The Gemara ends up saying that the pasuk tells us, don't take that kal v'chomer and say that there's actually lashes if you force a human worker not to eat. But the Bach explains, all we're limiting is the lashes, but everything else remains. That is, there's fully a lav, there's a prohibition. If a human worker is forced not to eat, that employer was over on a lav of an isser of l'sachsim shor b'disho. So we see from the Tur that when we talk about the poel, a human worker's right to eat on the job, that's not purely a monetary question. There's a lav here, there's an isser lav here to this, the Tur says. That's point number one. Point number two is the other piece of this. The Reb Chaim is saying, lo sachsim shor b'disho is purely a prohibition. It's like eating not kosher, it's an isser, it's not a monetary thing. So it appears to me that that's also not exactly true. For if you look in the Gemara in Sadi Aleph, the Gemara there says, it's also in the sheet, it's source number 11, the Gemara there says the following halacha. If somebody went ahead and muzzled somebody else's animal while it was b'disha, while it was threshing, the halacha is, first of all, he gets malchus, of course, he's liable to lashes for transgressing this prohibition. And second of all, umishalem, this person has to pay the owner of the animal. What does he pay him? Chazal evaluate how much probably, in general, this type of animal would have eaten. He has to pay him, compensate him for what it would have eaten had he not muzzled it. So clearly, the Gemara is saying that there is a monetary component as well to lo sachsim shor b'disha. It's not purely an isser, it's also a monetary thing. And therefore, I would like to suggest that these two halachas, lo sachsim shor b'disha, and by the poel, that a human worker has a right to eat, they are, I'm going to call them hybrids. They have both elements, both of them have both elements of Isser. It's a sin, you can't do it, it's like eating not kosher. And there's the monetary element. There's also the person or the owner of the animal has a monetary right to this, whether it's the human worker has a right to eat produce on the job, or whether it's the owner of the animal's right, his animal should be able to eat on the job. And if this is true, well, therefore, Tos's question is a really good question, and we're not going to try to answer that question. What is Tos's question according to us? Tosa says that the Gemara makes this whole drasha from Reyecha to teach us that a human worker is not allowed to eat produce of Hegdish. Why do you need a pasuk for that? We already know that from Lo Sachsim Shor B'Disho. For we're saying that Lo Sachsim Shor B'Disho is also a monetary thing. And therefore, that means that before the word Disho, we would have said that, look, the owner of the animal has a monetary right here. He has a monetary right to claim that his animal should be able to eat some produce as it's threshing. And therefore, even if it's working with Hegdish produce, there is no Isra Me'ila, I might have said. So comes along the word Disha to teach you, not true. We don't say that, and when it comes to Hegdish, there's no halacha that this animal has a right to eat it. So once that's true, go through the Hekesh and apply the same thing to Poel. And you don't need this word Reyach. The Tosas has a very fine question, and we're not going to try to answer that question. Now, what about Reb Chaim at a proof? Reb Chaim said you have to say that these are Shnei Dinim Nefradim. These are two totally different halachas. Because otherwise, how do you understand that the human worker halacha, that a human could eat food on the job, applies even by non-Jews, but the halacha that you have to let the animal eat as it's threshing does not apply by non-Jews? How do you understand that halacha? If what we're saying is true, that really both halachas contain both elements. So to that I say that to an extent we're agreeing with Reb Chaim in the sense that what is the basic halacha here? Meaning, when you read the pasuk in the Torah that says Lo Sachsim Shor B'Disho, what is the Torah saying? The Torah is saying an Isser, an Aveira, just like Reb Chaim said. It's just like the Isser that you can't eat not kosher. However, the area that we're disagreeing is that we're saying it doesn't stop there. Once there is a prohibition, the Torah says you have to let the animal eat as it's threshing, there is then also a monetary component to it. Now the animal's owner has the right to claim if somebody else muzzles his animal on the job, he can sue him. He can force him to pay him for that. And therefore the point is, since fundamentally though, Lo Sachsim Shor B'Disho is an Isser, it's an Aveira. So this Aveira doesn't apply by non-Jews. They're only commanded in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, not this Aveira. As opposed to the halacha of a human worker, when the Torah says that when Kisavo B'Kerem Re'echa, you're allowed to eat the grapes, fundamentally, basically, we're dealing with the monetary law. Reb Chaim is right that essentially it's a monetary law. We're just saying that from the pasuk of Lo Sachsim Shor B'Disho, we learn a kavachomer to a human worker that there's also an Isser element. It also has that Isser element. But since in essence, the basic mitzvah is a monetary thing. It applies even by non-Jews. Non-Jews also have to keep, a civil law, basic monetary law, and that's what applies by non-Jews. So in conclusion, we're saying that in terms of the basics, we agree with Reb Chaim that the halacha Lo Sachsim Shor B'Disho basically is an Isser. It's like a prohibition that you can't eat not kosher. Therefore, it doesn't apply to non-Jews. Just that we're saying that there's another layer, there's another component. It's also a monetary law. Once the Torah says you have to let it eat while it's threshing, therefore the animal owner has a monetary right to that. And therefore, the discussion that you have by Ishar in terms of does that monetary right apply by Hagdish is exactly the same as the discussion you have by a Poel. And so if the Torah already taught us by Ishar that it's true, Torah says Disho and not by Hagdish, we don't say as a monetary right by Hagdish, the same thing should apply by Poel, and therefore Tosas leaves off with the question in terms of why do you need this word Reyach at all? And I hope you've enjoyed. We'll see you in the next video.